So Dan Osterman is a state committee member, fellow state committee member, fellow precinct delegate from our neighboring 12th district, and he has been on this issue for how long? Almost 3 years. Almost 3 years. So I welcome Dan to our committee meeting, and I would like to 13 to give him a warm welcome.
First of all, I have to thank everybody for coming out. As Dave said, I've been on this for about 2.5, almost 3 years. I've lost count of the number of organizations and groups that I've talked to about this issue. As Dave said, it's about a state bank, and it's not about what you would call a traditional bank. All right? State bank is something completely different. It does not take retail customers. You and I wouldn't be able to go to a state bank and open up a bank account. That's not what this is for. But it can lower the taxes and solve our budget crisis. So here are some of the advantages that you have with a state bank. It can create new jobs, and it can help spur economic growth. It can generate new revenues for the state. Oops. Yeah. All right. It can lower debt costs for local governments, strengthen local banks, and even out the credit cycles, and build up small businesses. And as Dave said, a concrete example is the Bank of North Dakota. It's been around since 1919. I'll give you a little quick background on a little bit of history on the Bank of North Dakota. It was established in 1919, and it was established by a political party which was progressive at that time. After it was established, and because they obviously had a majority, after it was established, the Republicans started running on a platform to get rid of the state bank. They didn't like it and didn't want it. Well, it turned out when they finally managed to get control and they won the election, they went in there and they realized the state bank was actually a pretty darn good thing. And they kept it. And they've kept it ever since. The governor of North Dakota is a former CEO of the bank, former president of the Bank of North, I should say, of the Bank of North Dakota. And North Dakota is a red state, so they like their state bank. And get this thing to go. Okay. So how does it create new jobs? It allows local community banks to back promising startups. Okay. The reason for that is because a lot of times Wall Street cuts off credit to startup companies. Whereas in the state, if we have a state bank, the state can look at it as a startup in the state and say, hey, you know, it's worth it. Let's give it the credit. But because of specific accountability measures, the state bank make sure that public money is creating jobs. So when they give out a loan, there's accountability in it. If you'll notice the MEDC, when they give out money, it's pretty much a grant. It's pretty much handed over, and if they don't create the jobs that they promise that they're going to create, oh well, you know, we just threw it down a sewer hole, basically. Whereas in the Bank of North Dakota, every year they audit that business and they say, did you actually create 10 jobs? 100 jobs, and if they didn't, then they have to pay the interest at normal market rates. So they basically give them a lower interest rate, but they have to pay all of that. So there's accountability there to make sure that the loans are actually working and creating economic development. It generates new revenues, bank dividends. The bank's responsibility as a state bank is to be profitable and to be self-sustaining. If you look here, Michigan's projected long-term dividends based on the Bank of North Dakota, they in 2015, their payment to the state's general fund, if we had one, would be about $1.3 billion if we had our own state bank. And we extrapolate that from the performance of the Bank of North Dakota. They had by the way, they've had, I think, 12 or 13 years of record profits. Each year, their profit is bigger than it was the previous year for the last 12 years. The thing about it is it keeps interest money in Michigan that's going to Wall Street. You got to remember, we have about $79.5 billion of debt in the state. And we're paying about $2.2 billion a year in interest. It makes up about 4% of the total budget. It's $2.2 billion, and they wanted what, $1.3 billion for roads? If we had a state bank, we had that money instead of bonds on Wall Street, we had it in loans in Michigan, and we could loan it to ourselves at 0% for infrastructure projects, which is what North Dakota does. So if the state has an infrastructure project, a municipality, whatever, they get it at 0%. All you gotta do is just pay it back. We could be saving $2.2 billion today if we had all that money sitting in the state bank and all that credit created by our own state bank. And it can lend directly to local governments at below market interest rates. Here's an example that I use. This is Livonia. A couple of years ago, what they did was they took out a couple of bonds. There's what they call tranches. There's two of them. They're back to back. They're split up about 3 years apart. For a new high school, $195 million high school. They're paying 4.75 and 5% interest on those two loans. They're going to pay $175 million in interest. So they're going to pay about twice as much as what that actual cost of that high school is. Now, if they had gone to the state could have lent it to them even at 1% interest, and they would have paid $35 million, and they could have saved their community $140 million. Now, we could have given it to them actually at 0% and saved them $175 million. Why we're not doing this, I don't know. Anyway, these functions allow states and local governments to free up capital for important infrastructure projects and growth projects. In 2015, the state spent more than $2.2 billion, as I said earlier, just in interest payments. That's $79.5 billion we have in debt. For some reason, it's moving on. Okay, whoop, I went too far. And then it strengthens the local banks as it evens out the credit cycles by partnering with local community banks. I'll give you an example. If a local community bank has a business owner in his community, and that business owner says, I need $1 million loan, I want to expand my business. The local community banker says, I don't have $1 million to lend you. I can maybe give you $500,000. Well, the state can come in and partner with that community bank and write that loan for that small business owner. And they each take half of it. And that's what they do in North Dakota. They partner with community banks. They don't crowd them out. They don't try to get their business. It's not their charter. Their charter is to simply help the community banking system. They assist them. In fact, the North Dakota Bankers Association loves the Bank of North Dakota. As Dave mentioned earlier, back during the 2008 financial crisis, not a single bank won. Whereas there were about 1,500 community banks that went out of business during that time around the country. So, some people are worried that politicians are going to get involved in the bank. It's not the case. It's run by bankers. They're selected by the governor and whoever, depending upon what the legislation looks like. But it's run by people from the banking industry. They're selected from the banking industry, not politicians. Okay? I was on a conference call with a former board member of the Bank of North Dakota. It was like a national conference call. And he made a comment. He said he's never met a legislator who saw an economic development loan that he didn't like. He said that. So that's the reason why you got to have bankers running it, not politicians, because they're going to all come, want to spend money on their own little pet economic development projects. It doesn't happen in North Dakota. There's a certain set of criteria for loans, and everybody has to meet them. If you can't meet it, you don't get the loan. The Bank of Michigan would not risk any state funds or tax money, but is self-funding and self-sustaining. Because hopefully most people, and maybe not, but know how money, or I should say currency and credit is created. Okay? If we deposit, just as an example, a bank in North Dakota, they deposit all of their receipts. All the state's receipts go into their state bank and it acts as reserves. Okay? They got all the tax. How else is government get money? So, all the tax revenue goes into the state bank. Okay? Now, that money is not necessarily at risk. The reason is because you're creating credit. You're not loaning out the money. That money is acting as reserves. So most people understand when you started, like you would have started a bank. You started with $1 million. You're not lending out $1 million, but you're going to create credit electronically. And you can create, if it's a 10-to-1 reserve, you can create 10 times that much in credit. If you're not loaning out your own money. Just like in a normal bank. Deposited money is not lent out. When you put your money into a bank, that money is not being lent out. Okay? And the government of North Dakota has been able to lower tax rates 4 times in the last 10 years. A lot to do with the fact that their bank is providing so much in dividends every year. Here's some misperceptions about public banking that's riskier. But during the 2008 financial crisis, the Bank of North Dakota weathered the storm without any problem, had the lowest unemployment, the biggest state budget surplus, the most community banks per capita, and the lowest number of bank failures. They were considered the economic miracle. Wall Street Journal and Forbes wrote articles about how well they did during that time. The public bank would compete. Now, as I said before, it does not compete. In fact, the North Dakota Bankers Association supports the Bank of North Dakota. Private banks are already providing the services a public bank would replicate. Yep. Come on. There. This was shown to never be a liquidity crisis on Main Street. And there has been. And in some cases, there still is. Wall Street, a lot of the money that they're lending out is going to big corporations. It's not going to small businesses. And the return on taxpayers' money invested at the Bank of Michigan would not be significantly better than the return on investment the state is currently receiving in private banks or Wall Street. Okay? The returns right now are horrible. They're not even close to where they need to be. Very small returns for getting that down the money. And by the way, during the 2008 financial crisis, the state lost $18 billion from Wall Street investments. So state bank returns much more than just the income on investments, including interest income and a multiplier effect on the local economy. When we pay on a bond, that principal and interest goes to somebody on Wall Street. It could be a foreign investor, it could be anybody, private individual, it doesn't matter. It leaves the state. Principal and interest leaves the state. It's gone. All right? In some cases, if it's foreign investors, guess what? It's going right out of the country. But if we do this with a state bank, all that money stays here. It stays in the state. It gets to work its way through the economy, and there's money available again to lend out to small businesses. As that principal gets paid off, it becomes available again for more loans to go out to more businesses in the state. In its 2015 annual report, Bank of North Dakota reported 12 consecutive years of record profits with $130.7 million in net earnings. And remember, their GDP is 1/10 what ours is, and they had 130.7. That's how I extrapolated from that being 1/10. We would have had $1.3 billion sitting in that account, just in dividends, bank interest. Total assets increased from $7.2 billion in 2014 to $7.4 billion in 2015, and the Bank of North Dakota ended the year with a capital of $749 million. State's return on its investment, the bank was a healthy 18.1%. That's pretty darn good return. Yeah.
I was wondering, since you said they ended with $749 million, that must mean they're balancing the budgets every year, huh?
Well, that's basically what they have as reserves. That's their assets, right? So that's what they have left over.
But they're not borrowing against it for their
Oh, yeah.
deficit. So
Yeah,
it must
you
be
can
balancing
borrow-
their budgets. Huh?
Look at it, if they decide to set it at a 10% reserve ratio, that could be what? $7.5 billion, right? 75 billion if you extrapolate that 10 times in the state of Michigan. And by the way, we've got bonds of total about $79.5 billion. That's the state debt right now.
Assets increased from 7.2 billion to 7.4 billion. The capital is 749 billion.
Mhm.
I don't understand everything I know about economics,
Yeah.
but I thought capital.
What they do is they take some of the profit and reinvest.
Why is the capital only 10% of the asset?
But it doesn't need to be any more than, you're taking $750 million, it's basically the reserves.
So capital, you're talking about cash assets.
Right.
Okay.
So, building a state bank, still here. These are the initiatives taking place or have been taking place around the country. Right there's North Dakota, Oklahoma. They kind of have a state bank, but it's actually owned by the Chickasaw Nation. They own their own bank. And these are initiatives that have been taking place around the country. Illinois got it through the House, but they haven't got it through the Senate yet. These bills have been written. Have bills to form a state-owned bank, have another type of state bank bill, or have initiative to form a state-owned bank. This is not just at the state level. It's also taking place at the city level. Santa Fe, New Mexico just decided, after doing a quick study, found out that they could benefit tremendously by having their own city bank. So they're going to put up their tax receipts into their own city bank and use that. Biggest banks in the U.S. are making far fewer loans to small businesses. Together, 10 of the largest banks. Small business lending is down 38% from its peak in 2006. In 2015, large banks originated only 43% of business loans of up to $1 million and down from 58% for all of 2009. And it's due to the reduction, alternative non-bank lenders have more than doubled their market share in charging as much as 39% interest to small businesses. When we say alternative, these are some of these, storefront type of lending institutions. When a business can't get can't get a loan, or the line of credit is shut off, there's no alternative. So what does he do? He goes to some of these guys, and some of them are even putting it on their credit cards. Okay? And they're averaging 12.85%. Small business spending on credit and charge cards will total an estimated $445 billion this year, up from $230 billion in 2006. So you can see that this small business credit lending it's drying out. I don't know if a lot of you have been listening to or watching the financial pundits, if you will, or the experts. Majority of the money that's being lent out today is going to corporations and stock buybacks. And the reason is because they're getting it almost at 0% interest. They're also using it for M&As, which is mergers and acquisitions. So the majority, billions and billions of this money that's going into the economy is not filtering down to the small businesses on Main Street. So, and here's another fact. Wall Street has cheated states and governments through interest rate swaps. I don't know if any of you remember LIBOR. But anyway, LIBOR is the London Interbank Overnight Rate. And what they did was they cheated it. And because of that, municipalities got cheated on their bonds, basically. They were found guilty. They paid fines. Nobody went to jail. Strong job and revenue growth can be more easily accomplished by keeping public money at home where it works for the people, not the big banks. Once again, as I said earlier, the money stays here. It's your money. I probably should have mentioned that at the very beginning. This is about your money. This is not the state's money. This is not the governor's money. This is your money. Are you going to give your money to Wall Street and watch it take off and never see it again? Or are you going to lend it out to communities in your own state and get the money right back? It's yours. It's that simple. This isn't rocket science. Some economists believe that just having a state bank, you can dramatically turn around an economy within 1 year because you're keeping all of that money here in the state. It's not going outside. Here's a few interesting, there's a woman, her name is Marilyn Barnwell. She wrote for the financial, actually worked in the financial industry and wrote for the financial industry. But she wrote an interesting article, and in her article she said it's impossible to have state sovereignty without control of the state's monetary system. I'm not suggesting that we declare state sovereignty. And hopefully that would never ever come. But that'd be in the back pocket. If a state decides it needs to create its own currency, you have to have a state bank to do that. There was a time when states created their own currencies. But we could do that. We would be ready, we'd be positioned to do that if something happened where we needed to. God forbid we would ever need to do that, but it's there.
What's the nomination bill with Jennifer Graham?
Yeah.
The -1.
So here are the key points. A state-owned bank is a win-win. And Bank of North Dakota is a proven example, and it's good for the state economy and the state budget. As I mentioned before, we're paying about $2.2 billion in interest. Once again, if we had that money here in the state, we could have easily taken $1.3 billion and put that toward the roads. We could have taken $300 million and fixed the DPS in Detroit. And there's a lot of things we could have done without having to raise taxes. This is the important thing, is it's a revenue source. There's a recent report that just came out. It's called the Great Lakes Economic Council or something like that. I can't remember the last word. But anyway, they just did a report based on the last 18 years. And one of their conclusions was that in order for the state of Michigan to fully recover, we're going to have to find, at least municipalities are going to have to find additional sources of revenue. This is an additional source of revenue. Wall Street's corrupt. My bigger concern right now is that we won't get this done fast enough. Because if the economy crashes again, and when it crashes again, I'm not trying to scare you guys, but I'm just going to tell you, when it crashes again, it will be worse than what we saw in 2008. That is a given. If you think I'm wrong, do the research, okay? When that happens, if we have a state bank in place, it's going to be a whole lot easier to get through that storm than it is without it. And the point is, Wall Street is corrupt. And I'm telling you, it is absolutely corrupt. There is not a moral fiber left on Wall Street. They don't care if this thing crashes. They know it's going to crash. The sooner we can get our money out of there, or start putting our money into a state bank, the better off we're going to be. Because the money is at huge risk and time's running out. And as I said earlier, we lost $18 billion before, just on the pension funds, by the way. So, get educated. Here's one of the websites you can go to. It's called publicbankinginstitute.org. There's some information on there if you want to read about public banks and public banking. I have a Facebook page. It's called Innovative Solutions for Prosperity. I've got articles on there. I've also got a video on there. Go searching through it. It's called the Caffer Swindle, and I think it's important that everybody understand what the Caffer is and see what's in there. And open your eyes. The biggest scam in the history of mankind, and hidden secrets of money. Educate yourself on how money is created. It's not really money. This isn't about money. It's about currency and credit. Okay? Money is hard. It's gold, it's silver, it's something that of value. We don't create that. Banks don't create that. And there's also, on Facebook, there's a Public Banking Institute. They have their own Facebook page. Tell everyone you know about establishing it, volunteer to become a spokesman for the state bank. Call the right representatives in Lansing. By the way, let me just say this. We have a couple of really courageous representatives right now. Martin Howerlich, who happens to be here, and Pat Somerville. And these two are co-sponsoring. And Martin was actually the guy that I talked to about 2 years ago. We sat down in a restaurant and I first proposed this to him. Well, Martin's been on this and he's championing this thing. And we actually have I'm going to let him talk just a few minutes, let you know where we are on this legislatively. Bills are written. We're moving on this. This thing is going. What we need to do is we need to build a grassroots movement, a grassroots support for the guys in Lansing that are going to get on this. So we're going to support this. We want to make sure every one of our representatives are behind us and support this idea.
You're losing some of what he's thrown down.
That's all right. We're going to get this done. We're going to try and get this done before that happens. If you're a candidate, use it as a part of your platform. When you go out there, talk about you've got a solution, right? You support the idea. It's a solution. You would support the state bank. And we need to act quickly. Right. Anyone else?
Questions, anybody?
Yeah, like as in North Dakota, what they do is they have like a 3-tier system. Okay, so they have like an advisory board, and I used normally I can just rattle these off, but anyway, there's a 3-tier system in there, and they're usually they are or were selected by the governor, okay, who appoints. I'm not sure, but I think they are also using like a minority leader, a majority leader, who also gets a chance to appoint somebody. And one has to come from like the agricultural industry, one has to come from another segment of the industry. So they have a format, right, that the Bank of North Dakota set up on how they select this board or this advisory council. And there's, like I said, there's 3 levels of them. And in their loan process, if it's up to a certain amount, it can be handled by the loan officers. If it goes one step, if the amount is up to another level, then it goes to this other board. All right, they have to approve it. And then if the amount goes even higher, then it has to go to the top tier before it gets approved.
So the governor has a final say?
No, the governor does not have any say whatsoever. The governor and politicians have no say in who gets approved for a loan. It's all done by the bank.
Who hires the bank?
Huh?
Who hires the bank at the time?
They're appointed. They're appointed by the governor.
So the governor has nothing to say about it. He appoints the
Which is frozen. That's still the problem, yeah.
But they're coming from the bank. They come from the banking industry, right?
So,
But Martin can speak more to that because he has the bills written. He can tell you how that takes place. I don't want to get into the mechanics of the bill right now. I'm going to let him speak to it. It's going to take our money. It's going to use that as reserves. It's going to create credit for businesses in our state that are going to pay interest back to us. Okay? And essentially, those businesses are paying 0% interest because it's going back to the state use. But instead, what we're doing today is we're bringing in Wall Street bankers. We're paying millions of dollars to underwrite bonds, issue bonds, and we're paying them the principal and the interest, and the entire amount is leaving. Livonia, as I showed you an example, those taxpayers are going to pay $300-some million for that high school. Where's that money going to go? Somewhere on Wall Street, some investor who put up the money probably doesn't even live here, doesn't even care about Michigan. If Michigan did it, we would be the guys that would issue the bond. We'd be the guys that get paid that interest and that money would stay here. That's the whole idea of the state bank, is to stop throwing money away. You guys were all talking about the state throwing away money, wasting money, spending it on bad projects. I agree with all that, right? And that's a battle we've been having for how long? A lot of people even got involved politically because of that reason. They're taxing us to death. They're wasting our money, right? So here's a way for us to do something to at least stop wasting our money that we're sending to Wall Street. But at a state level, right, it affects all of us. Every one of us. I mean, why not do this at a state level? It's being done in North Dakota and has been for almost 100 years. How many more years of an example do we need? You know, if they had just started it last week, we said, man, it's doing great. It's been up for 2 weeks. No, this is 100 years. You got 12 years of record profits they've been making. So what is it that they can do better that we can? I find that awfully hard to believe that there's anything that they can do better than we can. We should have been on this a long time ago. We would have saved a tremendous amount of money up until now.
Prior to 1913, every bank was like this. The Federal Reserve came in and co-opted the banking system.
They did. Well, part
I
of
think
the
we
problem.
forget that.
Well, remember, North Dakota came along in 1919, and the reason was because the big banks on Wall Street, obviously with the help of the Federal Reserve, were trying to put all the community banks out of business, which was shutting down the farmers. And the big grain elevator operators in Minneapolis wanted those. I mean, they were trying to push these guys out of business over in North Dakota. So that's why they got together and said, let's form our own bank, because they were cutting off their credit. Okay. So it was essentially it was a defense against what was going on with the big banks in Wall Street.
Why don't we wrap this up?
Sure.
Let's regroup for a second. How many of you have never met Mark Howlerlack? He's one of our state representatives.
So I represent the cities of Boston and Troy up in Oakland County, and it's good to be here in this conservative Republican bank in Dearborn Heights. But although we say that tongue in cheek, that the folks that are down here, these, the folks that are conservative, really more to the principles and witness to others. The first time I ever heard about the North Dakota State Bank, I thought, oh my God, what the heck kind of socialism was brewing up there? And so I said this to a libertarian friend of mine. She looked at me straight in the face and said, no, didn't know what I was talking about, because in fact it was very libertarian and very limited government approach. And so in its purest form, it's government lending to government. And the example that I use is, many of us are married. So let's say my wife has $100 and she goes to the bank and deposits it. Let's say I need $50, okay? And marital bliss, by the way. So we love each other, and so shouldn't I just ask her for the $50? Well, it's kind of stupid if I go to the bank and ask for a 10% loan when our family already has the money. It's the same thing. Remember, in the United States, what is the prime level of government? It's the states, other than powers that are vested in the federal government and Constitution. Therefore, everything that's other than the state of Michigan is a subdivision through the state through the devolution of power. So our cities, our townships, our villages, our schools. And so as an example, I'm up to my ears in reading through different iterations of Detroit Public Schools, this, that, and the other. And so Dan here likes to talk about CAFRs. So I dig into the CAFR, and that's truly, there's a lot of information in a comprehensive annual financial report. So Detroit Public Schools, they get money from the state on a per pupil basis, right? Well, because they broke, they decided to borrow forward, and so they borrowed in the capital markets by effectively issuing revenue bonds. And the revenue bonds are implicitly guaranteed through the state constitution. In other words, all of the debt in local schools is interpreted to be that the state constitution says that if a local school board defaults, the state's going to come in and pick up the pieces. So why in the heck do we want them to go and borrow? And mind you, these are municipal bonds, right? So up in my neck of the woods, Troy Schools is issuing bonds at 0.8% because they're tax-preferred municipal bonds. The situation is so bad in Detroit that they've got a guaranteed revenue stream coming from the state, and they're subprime. And even though it's guaranteed, the bonds are guaranteed by the state, it's based on revenue that's guaranteed by the state, you're paying 6% on that. And these are tax-deferred bonds, too. So what you're doing is you're losing, and this is $210 million that gets rolled over every year. You're losing about $11 million to $12 million a year that's being thrown away. It's literally being thrown away. And you can, in its purest form, the state bank is government's lending to government. It's like it's me going to my wife and saying, "Could I have $50 of your dollars so I can buy the food for the groceries?" As opposed to me going to the bank and asking them to lend me $50 at 8% interest. It's the same concept in its purest form. Now, I'm not in favor of the state bank of anything getting into the student loan business, because you and I know about this whole Bernie Sanders free loan thing. I don't want to go down that path. Not only that, but you get into the
You're not feeling the burn?
Huh?
You're not feeling the burn?
I'll be feeling the burn in the hole in my pocket that I'll be finding.
Feeling the burn.
But so in my mind, we would want to keep a state bank in Michigan, or if I were in North Dakota, I would want them to stay to their core principle, which is no retail banking and government's lending to government, because it's all state money when you think about it. So when you use the analogy of a cooperative or a credit union, I think it's the best analogy. Now, also, when you keep in mind, all states, whether we like it or not, decided that they want to get into these economic development tools. And the state of Michigan is an example with the MEDC. I can't stand the MEDC. Not only do we appropriate money for the MEDC, but interestingly enough, they get casino money. Almost $100 million a year of casino money, private casino money, that's off balance sheet. In other words, it doesn't get appropriated. So you might not like the legislature, but at least you know that when they're getting into the appropriations process, you have an elected official that gets their say in the matter. With the MEDC, nobody does. It just goes, and whoever's running the MEDC at the time, so take that travel money and lend it out. So if we could at least have it, if you're going to do that, now we're getting into the moral equivalent. In my mind, you wouldn't have MEDC in the state bank. It would simply be protecting local units of government in the state, government lending to government. But I can tell you that it's going to go that route of getting into the government getting into the economic development business, having a banking model where you have strings attached and people have to pay back their loans, then that's a better model than MEDC. But I want to keep it in its rawest and purest form, in its simplest form, and again, no retail. So the answer about capital is the difference, the bank's capital is the difference between its assets and its liabilities. So in the bank, a liability are the deposits and the assets are the loans. And so in the Bank of North Dakota, we were throwing out those numbers. The assets are the loans that the bank had on its balance sheet, the liabilities are the deposits, and the capital would be the difference. So they have a little bit under $1 billion in capital using those numbers. Anyway, so on technical elements, we've got 3 bills and 1 constitutional amendment that we're working on, and I'm working hand in hand with Pat Somerville on this package, and we also have Christy Fagan, a Democrat from Canton Township, I think, that's from. And we're looking for a 4th sponsor, or I'll just take a second bill. And we are getting ready to introduce this. I'm hoping to do it. Hopefully we can do it before we break for the summer. And I just noticed one change I wanted to make in the main bill, and something what's called a quick start on where we're removing any references, because the State Bank of North Dakota has references to a couple of things which I want to remove from our version dealing with economic development. I really want to keep it as tight and close as possible. Anyway, so I'm here to answer any questions. Also, I just wanted to let you know that we've got a movement going in Illinois. It just passed the House, and then the banking industry started to freak out. They also have major budget issues. Yes, young man, what can I do for you?
What happens if all the states do this? What happens to Wall Street?
Probably not a whole lot. What it would do is it would close. So, I'm honest, and I'm frank about it. A lot of us in our retirement funds, we have municipal bonds. And I would tell you that if all the states did it, you would have fewer municipal bond options, and that's the main thing. Obviously, some investment funds are in there. You have a lot of speculators on Detroit bonds or school bonds.
would all the money from the CAFRE be in the state bank? I mean, would you pull all those rainy day funds and all that other stuff?
The reality is that the political reality of it is you need to have something that the banking industry can tolerate. And one thing I don't know if Dan mentioned, but the state bank is also, if you will, kind of a discount window for the community banks. So they don't have to go to the Fed, especially those that are only operating within the state of North Dakota or the state of Michigan. So this would I'm sorry, I got in the weeds. What was your question?
The CAFRE has more in it than just budget and revenue.
Right.
There's all the retirement funds. There's all the rainy day funds. If all those funds were put in the bank, I mean, that'd be a lot of capital.
You would not want, all of your retirement funds from the state, like the public employees retirement. You would not want that to go into the bank because you want them to get on a risk-rated return to have a certain amount. And they may put a little bit on there. They may put your cash in there instead of Bank of America, and they may get 0.5% instead of 0.05%. But you still want them to, their constituents are the retirees and also the taxpayers of whatever jurisdiction it is. And so they have to balance their risk and reward so that taxpayers aren't left with a big bill. And that's the stock kind of garbage they end up at the city of Detroit's pension plan. And it's also, by the way, because if they did put it in the bank, that would be no different than what happened to Social Security when they use that to mop up all of our federal government debt. All they do is basically buy U.S. government bonds, and that's why it's so dang insolvent. They don't get any return; they get like 2% a year. And you and I, our investment advisors, even in this environment, get at least 5%. But this is more about overnight. So like we all have a deadline to pay our property tax. Winter, we've got summer property taxes. So we can have our angst about the way our government spends their money, but they can't even spend it that quick. So they've got what we call overnight money. And same thing like in our local banks. Think of all of the people in the bank, all of the governments across the state of Michigan. Throughout the course of the year, there's extra money that's sitting around that hasn't been spent yet. So then that is used as the basis for the lending capacity. And I think that if you start off with something, you want to start off modest and small because you want to make sure, somebody mentioned something about a pilot program. And the way you do a pilot program is you constrain it until you get all of the bugs worked out. And you can do that statutorily, you can do that constitutionally as well. And the truth of the matter is, right now the banking industry is seizing its competition, so they are still also, the one thing I have to do, because we want our local officials to be able to make decisions in the best interest of the community, we're not mandating them to put money in the state bank, but we're adding that as an option. So you're probably going to start off with limited capital, so it's going to be basically a whole pilot program until it sells itself.
With the state bank, power, but they have to charge the audit proposed expenditures. I've heard this Livonia school cited as an example. $195 million was it? Catholic Central High School opened this school, state of the art, probably a quarter of a square mile campus. $34 million. Bought and paid for. A new football field, parking. It accommodates about 1,100 students. And it's got all of the facilities that you'd expect in a modern high school. Now, I don't know how that compares with what they bought for $195 million. But I'll bet it's better than 20%.
Livonia is not just putting up a high school. Livonia is revamping all of their schools, trying to bring it technologically up to date. They're redoing the building. It's not just a high school. So it's their entire school system. It's not just one building.
So they're not building any schools.
Correct. They're adding on and refurbishing.
But it wasn't even the point. Because
No.
again, this has nothing to do with how we spend our money. You
Right.
still have to deal with your governments on that.
Right.
All we were saying was that the fact was that $195 million was the bond. and to service the life of the bond was gonna cost the residents and taxpayers an additional $175. That's all we were saying.
No, and I
Pat,
agree,
we
but
know
I
that.
thought I heard him say, why are we gonna look at how much it actually costs to do it when somebody else can do it cheaper? That's where I thought it was going. That's why I said
We will be shutting down,
Only another
that becomes a separate issue. I mean,
It's a
the
separate
idea of how we're gonna spend money in the totality is a separate issue from whether or not the state of Michigan should be servicing loan permit greater. They're two separate.
That's right, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I'll admit
I mean,
it's a
the
complex
local
issue,
fiscal
it really is,
responsibility
but,
So what can we do to support you in getting this bill? Does it need to go to committee first?
Well, yeah, first it needs to be introduced, and so if anybody after this evening, if you have questions.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
If you have any questions, you can shoot me an email or call my office, and I can get you a copy of the bills. They haven't been introduced yet, so they're not on the legislation's website. I got a pile of cards in my pocket. I can hand them out like candy if you want. But what we need now, ideally, if you know somebody, Republican or Democrat, who wants to grab that fourth bill, that would be great. If not, at least get somebody to be willing to co-sponsor it. And it's something that you can't grab especially if you're somebody who's a limited government person. You can't. It takes a while to kind of digest all this. And the Public Banking Institute and also the State Bank of North Dakota just doing some research on what they've done. I will tell you, North Dakota is a unique circumstance. There are less than 1 million people. They're heavily dependent on oil. They're running a massive deficit right now, but they do have a sovereign wealth fund because they didn't spend the money when they were making it. But what can we do? Just call your legislator or try to get them to either co-sponsor the bill or grab that fourth one. And contact me and I'll email you the PDFs, or I can mail out the hard copy if you need that of the 4 bills. One, by the way, is the constitutional amendment.
Martin, what numbers?
I'm sorry?
What numbers are the bills?
They're not introduced yet, so that's, yeah.
Okay.
We won't have a bill number until we actually introduce them. We're on a very aggressive schedule to try to get them introduced next week, and we'll follow.
What's your email?